Welcome to the Whistleblower Newsroom. I'm Christina Borgeson. Child sex abuse, I personally think, is the worst crime in the world. It's soul murder of the innocent. It condemns its victims to hellish, lifelong sentences of living with damaged bodies and irretrievably damaged psyches. It's a global pandemic, and it's big business. My guest today has not only seen this horrific phenomenon up close, she was amazingly retaliated against by her own FBI colleagues for addressing it. A highly decorated 25-year veteran of the FBI, former Special Agent Jane Turner was fighting rampant child sex crimes and crimes against women on North Dakota Indian reservations when she was retaliated against for being so successful at it, triggering a 10-year battle with the FBI that she eventually won. Her story is deeply troubling, not only because of the criminal acts involved, but because she was attacked institutionally for exposing the failures of the FBI's child crime program. She's here today to talk about all that. Welcome to the show, Jane.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be on your program. I think highly of what you do.
Thank you so much. So your story is really shocking. I mean, when I that's a word I don't use lightly, but you walked 9 years into your career. You were assigned to be the resident senior agent in charge of 70,762 square miles of Indian reservation territory in North Dakota. And you were the only agent. And prior to your being there, I mean, you came and found just a horrific situation, especially since prior to your being there, virtually not one case of child sex crimes or women's sex crimes or crimes against women had been addressed. Is that correct? And you came in under hostile circumstances. So talk about that.
Well, thank you for laying that out. What happened is I was working in New York with organized crime. I was a profiler, a criminal profiler, trained by some of the best people in the business, Roy Hazelwood, John Douglas. And so I was doing a lot of profiling in New York City and doing mafia cases. And an opening came up in North Dakota. And I was from Rapid City, South Dakota. So I thought it would be a good time to head back into that area, which I really, really loved. And so I took the senior resident agent position there, which meant that you're responsible for, I think it was 14 or 15 counties, 2 Indian reservations, and Minot Air Force Base. And I was really looking forward to that because there had never been a senior resident agent who had been a woman before, and there had never been a woman who worked Indian country full time. So I saw that as a challenge, and I really wanted to do it. So I accepted it and headed out there and determined that, yes, it was a very sad situation on the Indian reservations. And these types of crimes really were not being addressed.
So first of all, the guy who wanted the job, who was already there, talk about him and what he was saying to undermine you. And I mean, you came to find a situation where, like in the end, you were describing children, dead, murdered kids on the side of the road, girls, with damaged internal organs. A kid was suffocated in a fridge. Horrific crimes you came into. You saw while you were there. Meanwhile, as you came in, again, as I said, which is part of your story, these crimes were not even being addressed. And there was somebody there, and that somebody had wanted your job and didn't get it, right?
Yes, that is correct.
And, okay, so talk about this and name names, Jane. This is a whistleblower show. So let's talk about old Ken. And
Yeah.
and what
Well,
he
there
did.
was old who?
Isn't his name Kenneth? What was his name?
Oh, Peter.
Peter. Okay,
Yeah.
let's talk about him. And
His name was Peter, and he had just a very short number of years, and he obviously was looking for bigger and better things to do than work on an Indian reservation. And I had really two there. One who was so concerned about getting dirty in Indian houses, he refused to sit on their chairs. And he stood when he interviewed him. He really shouldn't have been up there doing Indian work in the first place. But so there was really two there, and both, he was a first office agent, and they really had I think some hard feelings about having to answer to a woman coming in as a senior resident agent. They really should have answered to me, but from day one they refused to.
well, didn't they spread the word around that you got the job because you had screwed up someplace, and so you were being sent to the Siberia of assignments?
Yeah.
Okay.
Which had always kind of been the history of Minot, that they'd sent screw ups there, but I had volunteered because I was from that area. And yes, they had circulated that. They had really undermined me before I even got there. But once people found out that I was really competent, more competent than the two guys, it turns out, and that I was from the area, I was embraced. And of course, I came in with an excellent reputation. But yeah, they tried to undermine me right off the bat.
So
the supervisor.
Go ahead. No, go ahead.
No, the supervisor was in Bismarck, and I had tried for that position, and I had career training in my background. He did not. And so I had filed a complaint that he got this supervisory job, and that created a lot of hostility also. So yeah, it was pretty uncomfortable up there with the guy agents because they just hated the fact that I was so good at what I did. That was the bottom line. I'll be real honest with you. That was the bottom line. They hated it. They hated I could shoot better. They hated I could investigate better. They hated that I could get so many more informants. They made them up. So it
What?
was.
Wait, they made up informants?
Oh yeah.
In their reports?
Well, the ghost informants, like take for an example, an FBI agent would come to you and interview you about something, and they saw the possibility that they could go back to the office and use your name, and they could look up your information on the driver's license, on your driver's license, your date of birth, everything you need to open up an informant, sign you up, you don't even know it, and then start dumping information under your name.
When you had not even provided that information.
You're not even aware of it. It happened down here when I came down to Minneapolis also. I usually stumble on these people because I work with them, and then I tell them, well, you never told me you were an informant. And they went, well, I never was an informant.
So all right. So you get there and you see this landscape where stuff is happening.
Yeah.
And the first thing you start to understand is these guys are not doing their jobs. And explain the dynamic between the reservation elders, police, whatever, and these guys, and why no cases were getting prosecuted.
Well, it's kind of different on reservations. What is good up in North Dakota might not be good for the rest of the country, but we worked alongside the Bureau of Indian Affairs, which is known as the BIA. They have officers, the BIA. Mine was Homer White Buffalo, and he was a great guy. And he used to joke about they were the seeing eye dogs for FBI agents. Because, of course, we don't live on the reservation. And they don't have addresses on the reservation. They don't have maps, they don't have addresses. It's not like you can get an address of a home and then go there. It isn't like that at all. So you had to have a BIA officer who would take you to where that place was, where the individual resided. That's why he joked.
When a crime was committed.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct. or when you were looking for witnesses.
Okay.
They would know where the witness was at, whereas we didn't live there. We had no clue where Joe Blow might be hiding out, whereas they did. They could always find who we were looking for.
So, okay.
Yeah. So if you don't have a strong, and I'm saying strong hand on investigating and your BIA person, you can have stuff blow by you that is not true, or that they're covering up for somebody. And if you don't do your job, you'll never know it. And that's what was happening up at Turtle Mountain Indian Reservation. This kid was just taking what the BIA told him, and the BIA officer happened to be a relative of the victim.
Okay, so let's get into this case that's
Sure.
set you down the path of becoming a whistleblower.
Right.
We're talking about a kid named Ashke Chapeau, right?
Yes.
And he was 3 years old.
Yes.
And he'd been sodomized by his father, correct?
Terribly.
Okay.
And okay, so we'll take it from there. There was 2 Indian reservations, Fort Berthold Indian Reservation, the 3 affiliated tribes, and that was to the west of Minot, and then to the north and east of Minot was Turtle Mountain Indian Reservation. That's where the members of AIM came from. But I was doing a child sex abuse on both reservations because I was just good at what I did. So, you know, the more pie you eat, the more you're given. So I was doing them on both reservations because of the results. And at some point I said, listen, they're in opposite directions. This is taking too big a chunk out of me. And so give it to someone else. And so they gave it to this kid and another agent, Turtle Mountain. And I was doing my work, and the doctor got a hold of me one day, who I worked with at Fort Berthold on these cases, and said, what's going on with this case with this young 3-year-old? And I said, well, I'm not familiar, but if you fill me in. And then she proceeded to tell me he was so badly injured, it traumatized her medical team.
Wow.
Yeah, now that, you know, that's bad when it traumatizes the medical team.
So the FBI agent in charge of looking into that, was that Ronald? What was his name? Ronald Sanders? No?
Well, it was Peter.
Peter. Oh, it was Peter again.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. Okay.
Yeah. No problem. So, and she also told me the evidence was left in the emergency room. So there was a camera, because they take pictures for us. And they have a protocol for these cases. We might have been a little backwoods up there, but they knew how to do these cases.
Right.
Because we had given training. So I went back to the office and asked Peter, what is going on with this case? And I told him, the doctor said that this little boy was so horrifically injured, her medical team was traumatized. And he looked me right in the eye and said, she doesn't know what she's talking about.
What did you say? What did you say?
Well, I said, when did you get your medical degree? You know, it was just stunning. It's stunning. But I had, by that point, I had been so undercut that was just typical. So what I did, of course.
But he had been told, apparently, one of the problems is when some of these crimes occur, that they are relatives of the Bureau of Indian Affairs officials. And this was the situation in this case, right? And so the Peter, when the BIA guy protecting his family member, who was the father who raped this kid, said, nothing to see here, move along. Peter basically moved along. That's what happened.
He moved along.
Yeah.
And he also said it was a car accident and closed the case.
What? And what?
Yeah.
Wait. Explain how he could a damaged rectum like that on a 3-year-old, how that happens in a car accident.
Because agents have the power to open a case or close a case.
No, but how did they describe that crime? How did they describe that incident? the kid was laying on the ground and the car rolled over him, and there was a spike in the tire, or what? I can't even imagine. What story was it that they told?
Yeah, I said, what was it, the gear shift? I mean, it was just so preposterous. You know what I'm saying? I'm not making light of it. I'm just saying it was
no.
Well,
what did they say happened?
A car accident. He stuck to that story through the whole thing.
But what part of the car went into this child's rectum? Did he say? Do you remember?
He did not say.
Oh,
and
God.
I didn't bother, because at this point I'd had it with the guys I was working with up there. They were not repairable. Let's put it that way. It's the same as in the Nasser case. You know, the guy didn't even open a 71, which is our opening a case, FD 71. The guy in the Nasser case here just recently didn't open the case, and so it doesn't exist. Well, it's the same with the cases up there in North Dakota. He closed it, so it's done. And you can open it and you can close it. So what I did, because I knew he was wrong, is that I went to the AUSA who closed it. I told him the circumstances, and he reopened it. And he said, you take care of it. And I said, I will. And I went up there and I retrieved the evidence, did everything. And of course, we did get a conviction from it, and they gave it to Peter, the statistic, for the conviction.
Are you kidding?
Oh, yeah.
Now,
no, I'm not kidding you at all.
Now, in some, I don't know if it was in this case or in some other cases, a doctor who had seen several cases of child sex crime abuse, literally sent a letter to Patrick Leahy and Senator Grassley. Could you talk about that? I mean, this is how performing the FBI, these guys were up there.
Well, and that's absolutely correct. The doctor who'd seen so many of these traumatized kids did write a letter to these two senators and laid it all out, how they were not doing this or covering it up as a car accident. She laid it all up. But in the meantime, what was happening on the ground, that's up there in Washington, what is happening on the ground is that I had gone to see the SAC, special agent in charge of Minneapolis, and whose name was Doug. And I had, at that point in time, I was recognized as a national expert in crimes against children, interviewing offenders. So I had flown down into Minneapolis from North Dakota, gone in to talk to SAC Doug, and explained to him that this agent had screwed up. And we needed to take a look at the cases he'd done and see how many had been covered up. And he told me, you have a kid of your own to worry about.
What does that mean? What exactly was that? What is that? Is that a threat?
Yeah, I took it as one. So I flew back to North Dakota, and I thought about it, and I was standing in the grocery store, and I wasn't sure what he meant, but I had a feeling it wasn't good. And I was in the grocery store, and this thought came to me: if not me, who? And if not now, when? And so I pursued it. And that's where everything just went down the porcelain, you know what.
So walk us through what you did and what happened every step of the way.
Well, the thing you got to do is take it to your SAC or the acting SAC. And I did that. And I ran up against two obstacles. One was the acting SAC his name was James. And between James and Doug, they stitched me up so bad. They forced me to move. I just bought a house up in Minot. And so the first thing they did was drop a letter of transfer on me. I just bought a house, and there's no way you can appeal that. I mean, the FBI can move you wherever they want, anytime, for any reason.
Okay.
like the military. So, but in order that I didn't raise a stink, they told me I would be taking over the Crimes Against Children program in Minneapolis. Instead, what I walked into was no cases, everybody had been warned before I got down there, stay away from me. So nobody was really talking to me. And
so what happened there? So what happened after that? Well, when you realized that you were doing a ghost job.
Yeah.
In retaliation. Yeah.
I was ghosted. And they just did everything psychologically, socially. They just put the boots to me every way they could. They questioned me about anything. The SAC even said to me that he thought I dressed funny.
Well, I think they accused you of being gay.
Yeah.
They well, first of all, talk about also you eventually filed an EEO suit, right?
I did.
Now, why is it that you filed that suit? What happened?
Well, it was so awful what was happening to me, and I knew it was because I was a woman. They'd have never done that to a guy. Never have done that to a guy. And they were taking assignments away from me. I was the highest producing person up there that year. They did have an agent in Grand Forks whose name was Spence Hellickson. He was just absolutely phenomenal agent. And one year I beat him. And I was so happy. I was just so happy because he was the star. And of course, it just got worse. The more I did, the better I was. And the AUSAs were giving me cases, which just fried them, just absolutely. So now I got all the agents in the state angry at me because if you poke your head above the foxhole, it's going to get shot off.
So why did you file the EEO suit?
That was the reason, because I was doing a great job. I was being downgraded. I was being ghosted. So that's why I filed.
And so when you filed, all your paperwork was getting lost. Is that correct?
That is correct. Informants.
Go ahead. Informants, what?
Yeah. The paperwork was lost. I was continually fighting over it.
And then they initiated a national security background check on you.
Yes.
And what was their rationale to you about that?
I didn't know, and of course they came up with nothing, which must have been a stunner. When they went around the community up in Minot, they did that also, and everyone said, "Great agent, she represents the FBI, works 24/7," and they came up with nothing, 0. So I'm sure it was very hard for them, because normally that's how they can get an agent, is they just fan out and find anything. They drink, or you're gay, or whatever they can find, and then they'll dump you. They found nothing.
So then, after all this harassment occurred, you decided to file a complaint with the Office of Professional Responsibility and ran into a huge surprise there. Can you talk about that?
Pretty much it was all surprising. I'll have to tell you, the hits just kept coming. And in fact, I had a supervisor who said to me, "How can you stand this?" And I said to him, "Is this a game of whoever gets knocked out first?" I mean, he did ask me that. He said, how can you stand this pressure day after day? Why don't you just quit? And I was like, because
that's what they want you to do. That's what they want you to do, is quit.
Yeah.
So you filed a complaint with the head of the Office of Professional Responsibility, John Condit, correct?
Who has an interesting history, we found out later. He was charged with abusing children.
Yeah, he was convicted of sexually assaulting his 6-year-old stepdaughter.
Yeah.
So what was his? Go ahead.
Well, nothing. because how it worked is that, yeah, the Bureau is set up in a very interesting way. And the problem with the Bureau, and we have this new organization called Protect the FBI, which has just been formed by James Davidson and Mike Zoomer. And part of this is trying to bring consequences for these acts committed by agents who are never held to any standard or charged. They're simply let go.
They're allowed to retire with their paychecks, with their pensions and everything. Some of them are even, you know, before they retire, they're actually promoted.
Yes.
To me, it was shocking that you submitted this OPR, you know, Office of Professional Response, this complaint to them, and you're submitting it to a guy who's a pedophile himself.
I did not know that. Yeah,
I mean,
too bad. Yeah, too bad I didn't run into him in New York, because I did get rid of one in New York, but an FBI agent. But no, I did not know that. All I know is this is a problem with the FBI, and this is what we're trying to work toward. Same thing with the Nasser, which I've been talking to Grassley's people about, is this culture, this conduct where there's never any, you know, nothing ever happens to the agents who screw up. Nothing.
well,
And they get promoted. Peter got promoted. He went out to the East Coast and got promoted.
but it's not even
This is
about
what they
not
do.
acting. It's not even about not acting, because that Peter guy, he knew he was covering up. He knew he was covering up for this family. He knew it. He could not have known it. Okay.
Yeah, he knew it.
So, you know, he's not dealt with. And I swear to God, and I'm trying to figure this out.
Yeah.
Is how, like in the Nassar case, you were talking, because you recently have been talking about this Nassar case. We're talking about a lot of women here. As a matter of fact, Simone Biles was talking about how one reason why there were some things that she had not, some of the Olympic gymnastics competitions she did not enter into, and she said part of it was because of this residual stuff from having been one of his victims, you know. And people don't understand that stuff pops up whenever it pops up, particularly when you're under stress. So you know, but everybody's going, oh, how could she do it? But you know, this woman, first of all, has achieved more in her 20 some odd year old, 24-year-old life than, you know, a room full of adults. But anyway, so how can somebody like Nasser be allowed for years to do this?
Well, the FBI had a chance, and
when?
It is really simple. Well, they brought it to the FBI.
When? And what year? What year was that? Do you remember?
It's highly noted in the media, and I'm not sure what year, but it was brought to the FBI. The FBI didn't even open a case, and that's what I'm talking about. If you don't open a case, nothing exists.
Why did you not open the case?
He didn't think that it was fit into FBI violations.
What? What do you mean?
Yeah, he did. Well, it didn't fit into anything that the FBI investigates, according to him.
Is that true?
No, of course not.
Well, what was his rationale?
He had to come up with some reason when the pressure came on after they found out it had been brought to the FBI.
But
that was the best he could come up with. Oh, I know why he didn't do it.
Why?
Well, as soon as they came in there and started talking about pelvic floors, that was the end of that conversation. And it's pretty much the same with Peter. They're not, at that time, FBI agents were not really trained. You know, these people are not trained in how to do this. And it's a very specific type of investigation. So when Peter was confronted with this, he has no interest in looking into things like that, anal penetration and same with Nasser. They come in and they start talking about pelvic floors and the guy doing exams. It's a white doctor. Whose word are you going to take? The white doctor or these little girls? So I can see the FBI agent, he was a supervisor, he should have known better,
Don't these
thinking,
men
man, this isn't going to go anywhere.
don't they have daughters, these people?
That would be an interesting question to ask.
I mean,
But I've seen this time and time again. I don't think they feel they signed up to handle these yucky things.
I can barely breathe. I'm so shocked by what you're saying. How can you say if somebody has been criminally attacked just because it's a sexual attack, and not only it's a child being sexually attacked, you're saying
Right.
you didn't sign up for it and it makes you uncomfortable. So, oh, I'm sorry. You're more comfortable with, say, an FBI, a mafia guy chopping off somebody's head. But if it goes anywhere below the belt, you're not dealing with it? Are you kidding me?
Bank robberies. Hey, those are sexy. You know, things like that. That's what people come in the bureau for, the glory. And there's not a lot of glory in crimes against children. I never met any supervisor who, you know, that was their big spot to be promoted on.
I don't know. This is so disturbing. I can't even think straight. Okay. So that explains a lot about the Epstein situation, how that was that went on for years and years and years and years.
Yes.
And deals were. Talk about that for a minute.
I'm not really familiar with that, and that is
what I'm
way above a lot of people's pay grade. Way above.
Yeah. Well, that's the other thing, isn't it? I mean, I look back to the Franklin scandal, which has been now classified as a hoax. If you go on Wikipedia, they talk about it as a hoax. The Franklin scandal was like a child sex trafficking ring. Okay. Oh, remember that?
Yes. And in fact, I did the West Point daycare sex abuse case. I was in New York. Yes. And here's the difference. I'm trained by people like Roy Hazelwood, John Douglas, Rissler. Roy Hazelwood was my mentor. I mean, I absolutely love the man. And he taught me more than anyone could ever learn in a lifetime. So when the West Point daycare sex abuse, it was opened by the Bureau because a military. So what they did was they brought up, I was a profiler in New York and worked organized crime, but I was brought up and a couple other profilers were brought in. And we did this investigation and made an analysis, which was totally correct, and did it right. But if you don't use people, see, up in Minot, North Dakota, I didn't get that case. Somebody who was not trained, somebody who didn't want to work it, got the case. So what happens? Well, he closed it. And when I brought it to the attention, and at that time, like I said, I was recognized as an expert. Nationwide, I taught. I thought by coming down to Minneapolis and saying to the SAC, this is not the FBI we want or need, he would simply go, find out how many cases had been closed that shouldn't have been, dealt with this agent, and life goes on. That's not what happened at all. He decided, let's take out the messenger. Let's take out the expert.
Why?
And that's what happened.
Why?
And he did.
Why?
Well, when I was constructively discharged, they said I embarrassed the Bureau. And that's it exactly. They did not want anyone to find out that the FBI was covering up child abuse cases.
Okay, so talk about when you were assigned to that daycare thing. Talk about your analysis and what happened.
Well, it was very simple. When you're trained, you can, when you interview the child or the offender, you have the ability, when you're trained, to discern whether they're telling you the truth or not. And that's a skill. It really is. It's a skill and a talent. And we determined that there was no substance to it. Now, that's great for when there isn't any substance to it. And then you don't want to be running around saying, at that time, Satan worshiping, sacrificing kids was very big. I don't know if you remember that or not.
Yes.
That,
I mean, this Franklin
was,
child sex ring case was
yeah.
allegedly connected to Satanism and all that too.
Yeah, exactly. Same thing. And we determined there was no foundation. And it was true. There was no foundation.
So now let's go back to this, the Indian reservation situation.
Sure.
Because you don't have to be a profiler to look at physical evidence of a child having been anally raped. I mean, I'm sure.
No.
So that's in a way, that's a very concrete case of sexual abuse that he just passed on. And I just feel like, I don't know, Jane, everything that you said to me is deeply troubling, because what it's telling me is there really is no proper institutional training or organization or structure for dealing with this pandemic situation of child sex abuse.
Well, it's kind of like when you come in the bureau, they knight you, you're a knight, boom, and you're allegedly able to do anything. So, you can do bank robberies, you can do organized crime, you can do crimes against children. I mean, you're just at that point when you get your creds, you're specially endowed with the ability to investigate anything. So that's why you would get people who really are not trained. They're just thrust into this role.
So that's a huge institutional fault that instead of going like, when you go to university, the first couple of years, okay, you got to take English, you got to take math, you got to take a little science, you got to do the general education, but then you become a specialist. You have a major and you get to know what's what in a specific area. So when you come out, you know something about that specific. You're saying you don't have that in the FBI?
Well, over time, you could put in for follow-up classes back at Quantico. But no, once you're knighted an agent, then you can be sent anywhere to do anything.
I see.
You can always go back.
Go ahead.
For further training, like to be a profiler. I wasn't trained in the new agents classes. That was training I received later when my background was in behavioral psych, and that was my interest. So of course I put in for profiling and was lucky enough to be picked out of Seattle.
But that seems like a huge institutional problem, that agents are just assigned and they really have no specific training in the areas to which they're assigned. And especially for children's sex crimes, that's like criminal to send incompetent people, because you're talking about these poor, nobody is more vulnerable as a group than children.
That is correct. And but it tells you more about Peter when he would say, the doctor doesn't know what she's talking about. That tells you more about him than, you want to talk incompetent. They talk about the power of the creds. You come in with your creds and, FBI, and that is, infuses you with a tremendous amount of power. And there are people who take advantage of that power. And he was definitely one.
Well, but I just don't understand the headspace of somebody who's a human being who has so little thought for a child who has been damaged like that, especially when it's his job to do something about that, to get justice and accountability so it doesn't happen. And just doesn't do it. When you take that and you extrapolate it out to the whole institution, which does not specifically train people for this very high responsibility responsibility task of protecting the most vulnerable, literally
Yes.
the most vulnerable among us. And
Yes.
and also you can say, you know, they aren't specialists in a lot of things that they might be specifically assigned to.
Right.
That is scary to me, but that also explains a lot of the quote incompetence that
Yes.
we see across the board with the
Yes.
FBI. And it also, because when you're incompetent, especially on high profile cases,
Yes.
when you screw up, what is it that you do? You cover up. So it also
Yes.
explains the high numbers of the outrageous cover-ups and the outrageous retaliation against people who stand up and say, hey, this is wrong, this needs to be addressed. And
Because it pops the bubble, doesn't it? It pops that reputation of the best, the greatest. You know, they can't say that anymore if it's revealed that somebody is incompetent, or more than one. So no, I wasn't surprised about the guy who was a supervisor. He didn't even bother opening a case because, you know, a lot of people didn't come in to work those kind of things. They didn't come into the FBI to work those kind of things. A lot of military, and that's why if you if you ever look at the statistical data, guess who is assigned the majority of those cases?
who?
Make a guess. You only have two sexes.
Men.
Women.
Women are assigned to the sex crimes?
Yeah.
Well, I
majority
think that
are
I
women.
actually think that's a good idea.
Well, in this case, yes, because they appear to have a little more compassion, but they really shouldn't. You shouldn't be pigeonholed by that, because really promotions are not based on those kind of cases. At least I never saw it in my career.
Well,
So of course you'd have women doing it, you know.
oh God, I mean, so when you again, I'm shocked because you go, well, you know, child sex crimes, you know, promotions aren't big in that area, so people aren't big on that. I'm just like, my head is reeling. You know, I never expected, I have to tell you, in
Yeah.
this conversation that we're having,
Yeah.
I never expected you to reveal something that I had not even contemplated about the FBI, which is they're not really, when they go out in the field, after they leave their Quantico training, they're not
Yeah.
really trained to do anything specifically at all.
Well, you're trained to shoot your gun, because you can't get through training without that.
Well, anybody can get trained to shoot a gun, you know, literally anybody, unless you can't, you know, you're too crazy or whatever to
Right.
get your gun
But-
license. So I'm sorry, that's not a criterion.
You're trained to know the law,
Okay.
because of course that's important. And the third aspect you get in training is physical. So you have to, you have to know how to fight, and you have to know how to do those kind of things and be in good shape. So those are the
And
three things.
that's it?
Well, that's the three big core when I went through.
Oh my
And
God,
then-
Jane, I can't stand
No.
this.
Well, that's what I say. And then you get your badge, and it's figured that any agent can do anything. So yes, there's been some real problems that have occurred, and I could do a list of them after the terrorism hit big. That was seen as a major thing in the FBI, and people brought in their good friends to get these plum positions. And the agents who had training, Bassem Youssef is an excellent example, could speak the language. He was bounced out so somebody could have his spot. It's figured if you're an agent, you can do anything. So that allows for, the good old boy network to continue. And before people think that I'm bashing the Bureau, I love the Bureau. I spent 25 years in it. I met some of the finest people I'll ever meet in the Bureau. I also met some of the biggest blowhards, and one was a sociopath. So, the fact they don't do anything about these people who are terribly incompetent or sociopathic, that's where the problem is.
Yeah, but you have a structural political training, particularly training problem at the FBI. If people don't hit the ground ready to address specifically the crimes that they are assigned to address, that, my dear Jane, is a humongous problem, particularly with terrorism, for example. And now when you're telling me that you have an institution that is so politicized that someone who speaks the language of the terrorists, who's a fantastic agent, is shunted aside because somebody else is a better political operator than he is to take his job, that scares me, and it should scare everybody. And now we can understand why big cases, okay, big, huge cases, and I know I've looked into some of them, where in the end, there's either a huge cover up, like I did the TWA, I worked on the TWA case and ended up doing a film with 6 whistleblowers who were part of the original investigation, NTSB investigation, including a senior NTSB investigator. And the FBI was put in charge of that investigation, even though the FBI knows nothing about airline, investigating airplane crashes. They know nothing. And they became the lead agency. And in the end, they just shut the whole thing down, covered up a whole bunch of evidence with what? A CIA animation, an animation done by the CIA, which was completely bogus. So that's a very high profile case. The Whitey Bulger case and everything that was done with that. I mean, so now, because of what you just said, I now understand what the big problem is. Does the FBI know that it has these?
I think they're more concerned with the reputation. So I'll give you a couple examples.
Yeah, but their reputation is never going to get better unless they train their guys properly and specifically for whatever jobs they're going to do. It's never going to get better. They're going to constantly be covering up their incompetence.
Yeah. And that's probably a congressional problem. But let me give you an example. Fred Whitehurst of the FBI lab fame, he blew the whistle on incompetent people there in the lab, and they shot him. I'll give you a real quick example.
Yeah.
You'll like this one. I put in for an Indian desk back at Washington, D.C., and they picked a guy, no surprise there, during this time, we're talking years ago, who was out of New Jersey. And this guy wouldn't have been able to recognize an Indian if he'd run into him on the street. So I called back there and I said, I'm just curious why you picked this gentleman from New Jersey over somebody like me who's had years of experience working Indian cases. And the head of the criminal section of the FBI said to me, well, we knew him and we did not know you. Okay. I said, how are you going to get to know me? And he said, well, if you come back here on a rotation and work back at headquarters for a couple of weeks, which I did. If that's the secret, I'll do it. And I did. I went back and worked 2 weeks in the criminal division so they could get to know me. And of course, I came back into Minneapolis, and of course, we had this huge blow up EEO and a cover up of theft from ground zero, bunch of stuff. So, but the fact that he said that, just like no big deal. Well, we didn't know you. So it's not merit, huh? It's who you know.
Well, the other thing is I'm wondering, is sexism a big problem in the FBI?
Oh, big problem. Oh, always has been. Hoover, it may be dead, but he lives on in the Bureau. Oh, big problem. Always has been.
You know, for a man who's worn a tutu once or twice in his life, that's
Oh no,
that's a hell
you're
of
gonna
a.
get hate. You're gonna get hate mail.
I don't care, because I feel like the FBI has a job to do, and on these
Yes.
huge cases, it's not doing its job. And you know what? You put your finger on it. I mean, I never thought of that. I never thought of the fact that they leave Quantico and they're really not specifically trained to do anything except, you know, shoot a gun, be physically fit. And what was the third thing?
Know the law.
Know the law, you know? And so I just, I think if that to me, I didn't anticipate that to be the biggest takeaway from our conversation here, but
yeah.
So okay, but let's talk about something here, because we're talking child sex abuse.
Sure.
We're talking something like in the cyber world, for example.
Sure.
I remember there's a 2011 bust of the dark web where they busted a network of 70,000 people who were on this pedophile network. I have read books about rampant pedophilia in government agencies at the very top. You now have groups, like there's a group now, it's called Veterans for Child Rescue. It's such a huge problem that other people are forming groups to address it themselves outside of the institutional agencies that are supposed to be addressing it. You know, this Veterans for Child Rescue they're going around the country, they're working with local law enforcement, and everywhere they go, they've got, I mean, in this one documentary I was watching the other day, who walks into from this local town, they were in this town, I forget where it was, who walks in, but the Army recruiter, the local Army recruiter, okay, U.S. Army recruiter walks in to, you know, have sex with a 13-year-old kid and gets busted. So, you know, you're a profiler.
Mm-hmm.
Who are these people? Who are they?
Well, that's where training comes in. You know, there's different subsets, and it does take expertise to parse it out. Offenders do it for a myriad of reasons. There's a myriad of offenders, so you have to know the offender profile in order to determine, you know, what the reasoning for it is.
You know,
because some offenders simply get drunk, and we call that a crime of opportunity. Boom, you know, the only thing around is a 9-year-old. There's fixated pedophiles. So I mean, there's all kinds of things. It really is. There's a lot to it. It's not simple. That supervisor, when the guy came in to file a complaint against Nasser, he probably had no idea what the guy was talking about, you know, pelvic floors and, you know, and of course you're going to go with the doctor because the doctor
pelvic floor. I'm sorry. If you talk about vaginal exams, okay, you come in with a shoulder that's hurting you and all of a sudden you have to have a vaginal exam. I'm sorry. Well, I could explain that to my 10-year-old and they'd get that. If you come for a tour and you want to stick your finger in somebody's vagina, that's a whole different exam, isn't it? I mean, come on.
But see, it's easy. It's easy to figure, just like my guy. Well, the doctor didn't know what he was talking about. In this case, in the Nasser case, the supervisor probably felt the doctor knew what he was talking about. So it's all got to do with how good you are at your job. Are you just going to go beyond somebody telling you something? Are you actually going to do an investigation? And that's what I did. I was like a pit bull. I'd go in there and, you know, just tear everything apart, finding out the truth.
Okay.
These people do not.
Here's the thing.
Yeah.
A doctor tells you one thing.
Yes.
Meanwhile, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, all these, like a dozen girls arrayed versus this doctor. And these girls
Right.
are all old enough to know what's going on when they walk in there. Are you telling me that their testimony, okay, or their description of what happened to them does not inspire you to want to go talk to the doctor again and look at his records and see what he has to say? And if all their stories match,
Yes.
which they did, you're telling me that doctor has what he says carries more weight than all these girls? I don't get it. I mean, it's not even a matter of having expertise. I'm
Right.
not an expert, and I'm telling you, if I went and talked to him,
You would have seen it. Yeah.
But all these girls, I go, can I see your
Right.
documents here? Could we
Right.
have another chat? Could we this? Could we
Right.
that? Did you do,
Right.
But that's not done.
No, he didn't want to.
But that's not good enough. He didn't want to. That's like saying, I don't want to do my job. I'm going to let this crime continue.
Okay, let me put it this way.
Is that not aiding and abetting the crime?
Well, let me put it this way. You would have never found out. I mean, this is done every day. Supervisors make decisions on what's open and what's closed. He decided he didn't want to open it. So he would have never been caught unless this had been a high profile deal. So you have to ask yourself, how many have slid by that weren't high profile?
Listen, I'm watching the whole Epstein thing happen right now. And and just like Anthony Weiner, Huma Abedin's husband, they found all this stuff on his computer. Have you noticed how, he went to jail for what, a few months? I don't know, not very long. But it's almost like I'm suspicious that there is protection in the FBI of high profile people. I'm suspicious of that.
And that's way above my pay grade.
Well, whose pay grade is it?
That would be the top.
Well, let me ask you something. Given what you know about the institution,
sure,
given your experience,
sure.
If someone said, I'm suspicious that there's high profile, high level protection of political leaders, for example, high level, maybe business leaders or whatever, when it comes to child sex crimes, would you say, yeah, I think that's a legitimate thing to look into? Or would you say, no, that's not possible?
Well, most people would say that's not possible. However, in my experience, I know anything's possible because of what happened to me. No one would have ever thought that what happened to me would have happened. The Bureau would have never done that, but they did. So I don't know what's possible, but I know those questions should be directed at Congress, and Congress should be asked, what is happening at the FBI? Why are these things happening? And is there a cover up of high political leaders? Congress has the ability, but they don't have much of an appetite to control the FBI. They have the ability, they do not have the appetite.
Why? Why do they not have the appetite?
Well, I talked to two senators about my case, two senators I had helped in terms of FBI stuff. I had helped them on cases. Both of them told me they would not take on the FBI. And
are they afraid of retaliation?
Oh, yes. Attorneys. You have to find an attorney like Stephen Cohn from the National Whistleblower Center. There are not a lot of attorneys willing to take on the FBI just because they are brutal. They are brutal. And they may have something on you. I mean, I can't blame Congress. I've seen so many people, concerned.
I can blame them. It's their job.
Yes.
We pay them. It's their
It
job.
is their job.
I'm sorry, I'm not gonna,
But they're doing it with Nassar. They're doing it with Nassar. So you got to give them credit. They are doing it with Nassar.
Well, we're gonna have to leave it at that because we've run out of time. But Jane, you're a hero in my book.